Well, we're back again. We're continuing our discussion of the events of 2026. This is part 3. We'll be talking about the Congress of European Federalists, Paganicon, Earth Day, and some other events that are happening. Hope you enjoy. Yeah, I don't think they anticipated the effect when they opened up the, as when the Arab Spring. I mean, the cause of European immigration was primarily the Arab Spring and the incredible disruption that happened in the Muslim world and people fleeing for their lives to go to a place where they could live in peace. Then they get there, and I guess what they don't understand is at a fundamental level, the root causes of the suffering that they were going through in their home countries was the belief system that they carried with them.
And I have Paganicon on the calendar simply because it reflects, at a local level, the re-enchanted worldview, moving from the era of Christendom to modernity to postmodernism. And within the flux of postmodernism, you certainly see paganism emerging in a significant way, and Paganicon reflects that. So on moving forward, March, I don't have the exact dates. I didn't have it then, though they may be announced already, but that is the Congress of the Union of the European Federalists in Barcelona. And the European Federalists, the Union of the European Federalists, they're like decades-old organization working for tightening European integration, tightening European federalism. Been around for, like I said, a long time. And every 2 years they hold kind of like an not annual event, but like a membership general event where they work through internal policies, energize campaigns, sometimes adopt manifestos, establish policies moving forward for the next 2 years, organize the group's agendas and how they can help anticipate and push forward for the creation of a United States of Europe, a European superstate, because that is their goal. That actually is their hope and belief, is that Europe will become completely federalized into a true European federal union. So that's coming up in March. It's a group and a movement I particularly watch because they are kind of like the intellectual power, so to speak, behind European federalism, the idea of a deeper European Union. Again, one of those larger geopolitical kind of plays.
Question about the European Federalists. Have they ever come out and said anything that you know of in relation to the immigration challenges that Europe is having? Because if the idea is Europe has such a diverse array of different cultures and languages, to get them all to come together is really, really hard. The European Union kind of feels like it is falling apart, but it never does. It kind of feels like it's falling apart, but it doesn't actually do it. And but the immigration, especially of massive numbers of Muslims coming into Europe, is changing the cultural landscape of Europe significantly. To the point that, I mean, almost like the last time Europe was actually really united and it held together was under the Roman Empire. And it's because there was a dominant political system, the Romans, that allowed the incorporation of all these different ideas of different tribes that were living in Europe at the time. I'm wondering if they would be looking favorably on the idea, on this, another culture coming in and starting to dominate in certain areas, or if they're just weak, or if they're against it, but they're weak and they haven't been able to have any influence. Because it does seem like that's having such a dramatic effect on Europe. I hear people from Europe talking about how they feel like they're losing their culture because of immigration.
Right. Yeah, I can't answer that question, George. I'd have to go into a little bit deeper, maybe into their literature, and see what I could find. And I know people are going to say, well, the European Union, and to your point, the European Union seems to be falling apart, or there's always these tensions splitting it apart. And right now we're seeing farmer revolts in Belgium, England, France, and I anticipate it's going to get even more intense yet, because we do see now an uprising, a clash at the local level against policies from the national level, policies adopted at the national level that come through international agreements and international negotiations and the international narrative. And then it comes home to roost nationally. And then from there, it becomes implemented, and all of a sudden you feel it locally. And we're seeing now this, an earthquake within the Europeans' social fabric. That said, there's we can anticipate the move towards a deeper, tighter European federalism, and it may happen, and it may not. Nevertheless, events like this, movements like this, demonstrate the continuity of these ideas. And the influence that they have sometimes isn't necessarily observable immediately, but because they have the ears of politicians, and they themselves, I mean, the Union of European Federalists have members of Parliament, members of the European Parliament right within their midst. The ideas still end up having some validity. It builds momentum. It builds the energy towards some outcome, some goal. Whether that's achieved or not is maybe a different story. And especially as Europe seems to be so fractured right now. Well, that said, when things become super fractured and things become super heated, there is a tendency to integrate and solidify after the fact. There is that point. I mean, the largest examples, the most dominant examples, World War I gives us the League of Nations. World War II gives us the United Nations. So what do we have coming down the pike? I don't know. I can guess. But yeah. So maybe with enough social disruption with immigration, it forces something else to happen. I don't know. That's a speculation, and oftentimes there are unintended consequences without any conspiracy needed. It's just, this is what happens. Here you go. You put the policies in place. You allow mass migration to come in for maybe a certain reason, and there are consequences that happen that are unforeseen, or that could be foreseen, but are ignored.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I don't think they anticipated the effect when they opened up the, as when the Arab Spring. I mean, the cause of European immigration was primarily the Arab Spring and the incredible disruption that happened in the Muslim world, and people fleeing for their lives to go to a place where they could live in peace. Then they get there, and I guess what they don't understand is, at a fundamental level, the root causes of the suffering that they were going through in their home countries was the belief system that they carried with them. And in order to ultimately alleviate that, the militancy of Islam, that, Islam has built into it a combination of, tribalism that is, and I can't speak authoritatively. I've just heard people and read about people that have analyzed this, that it's built into tribalism and a continual cycle of war, because Muhammad apparently wanted to make sure that no one person would be dominant unless they could prove themselves or something like that. And so they bring that with them. It brings those values, and ultimately those values end up taking over. Then those countries end up going into that same way of living. Okay, well, why don't we move on? We got Paganicon March, at the end of March.
Yes, You've been to Paganicon, I've been to Paganicon, and it's an annual event in the Twin Cities. And I have Paganicon on the calendar simply because it reflects, at a local level, the re-enchanted worldview, moving from the era of Christendom to modernity to postmodernism. And within the flux of postmodernism, you certainly see paganism emerging in a significant way, and Paganicon reflects that. One of many, many, many events across the U.S. and around the world that in which pagans come together for ceremonies, for rituals, for workshops, for networking, kind of to do church at a much larger level. And Paganicon represents that movement, this reemergence of that pagan worldview now being expressed.
One of the challenges I faced with talking to people about this is, how do you say that going to events like the Dayton Dialogue, NATO, or UN events are connected to something that's happening at a place like Paganicon? And where I see it is, and you can speak to this, where I see it is they're on the same spectrum. The spectrum being, this kind of line that goes through all these ideas that are pushing toward a unified, coming together belief system. Something that, and why I think the world religions, the interfaithism is also a very big part of it, because that kind of binds them together, because we can all, their ideas that we can all have, we can put aside religious differences but this at some level still kind of have the same beliefs about things. I remember last year at Paganicon, they were talking about paganism is the fastest growing religion in the United States. A friend of mine in our Bible study here just told me just yesterday, he was at the local crisis pregnancy center, and a guy and his girlfriend came in to talk, and this guy told him that he was a worshiper of Celtic gods, and that he's found power and strength through doing that. So really interesting. So that's on one end of the spectrum, and then you have people that are pushing for the technology and the political side of integrating the world and managing the world. And it's kind of similar to the idea that the Roman Empire had, in that the empire itself didn't care what religion its practitioners were, as long as it didn't say that it was the only religion, the only legitimate religion, and as long as they, their activities were focused on doing things that helped, Romanism.
Yep. I think another angle to this that's important for people to realize is that in studying what seems to be diverse cultural movements, political movements, even security fits into this. In studying this, you end up seeing things from I'm going to use maybe certain language that hopefully fits it, and that is, you see things from a holistic point of view. You see things now integrated, that ideas do not remain separate from action, that there is always a bleeding and a blending back and forth. And there's a difference, obviously, between the Munich Security Conference with heads of state and generals and admirals walking up and down the hallways versus what's happening at Paganicon with school teachers, moms, retired people who are now worshiping, Athena or Diana or whoever. There obviously is a massive difference between those two worlds, and yet culture, religious views, social change, all these integrate eventually into the realm of politics. It involves social disruption. It ends up landing in the realm of policy. You have to see this as a holistic shifting point within culture, within civilization, I should actually say, not necessarily culture, but civilization. So many of these seem to be divergent, and they are divergent, and yet at the same time, taken together, they paint this incredible picture of a world that's in flux and that was rapidly moving away from Judeo Christian principles to trying to find a new framework, trying to find a new way forward. And so I think one of the big values, at least for myself, is I see it then in a broad spectrum, that these are not just simply independent moving targets, but they are all part of an ecosystem. And it's the ecosystem of ideas, an ecosystem of worldviews. And the ecosystem behind all of that is ultimately has a spiritual dimension to it. Do we follow God and wait for Him to build heaven on earth? Or do we force heaven on earth now? So that's how I've wrestled with it, George, because they are, and it's a legitimate question. They are separate. They are very different. Very legitimate question. If you're only willing to see things in bits and pieces, it's a very legitimate question. But when you start seeing it as a larger integrated ecosystem of worldview shifts, you're going, oh boy. When you see it that way, it tells a huge story, and you can't help but see the convergence points between all of them to some degree, whether it's explicit or implicit, but you end up finding it. And sometimes you don't even see it until after the fact. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, yeah. Oh, at the Munich Security Conference, they were talking about this, this, and this. But that also has a worldview component, a social component, a cultural component, a religious component. And you and I both know that even at events like NATO, the NATO forum, we had one whole working session on art and culture. They understand the value of it. They understand the importance of integrating that within the conversation, because these are not standalone issues.
Yep. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, let's keep going.
All right.
We're in April.
April 22nd, I have on the calendar, and of course, there's lots of other things that will be happening, but that is Earth Day. And at the United Nations, it is the International Mother's Earth Day. And yes, International Mother Earth Day. And that is an officially declared day at the United Nations. And it was chosen specifically because that is Earth Day. The very first Earth Day took place in 1970 as an environmental teach-in. And I look at that event, April 22nd, 1970. I use that event personally as kind of like a hinge point to say Re-enchantment entered the stage full-blown. Because at that point, 20 million, mostly students across Canada, the US, and other parts of the world, but primarily America, focus their attention now on how we can serve the earth. And the world has changed.
Yep, it has. Wow, really interesting. So I don't know that I've ever really done any, followed Earth Day celebrations myself. It'd be interesting to actually observe, see if anyone is actually doing anything locally on that day, and go to the event and see what they're doing and see what they're saying.
It's called the world's largest secular holiday, but that's a misnomer. That's inaccurate. It's not secular. It is very, very much has a spiritual element to it, and that is a Romans 1 angle of worshiping and serving creation rather than the creator. Hey, the U.S. Army, for quite a while, had an Earth Day program. Toyota had funding for Earth Day projects. It was like all of the corporate world and every school and every agency was jumping on the bandwagon. I think with the shift in America's geopolitical scene, some of this kind of probably got dropped. You know, I don't know if the U.S. Army has an Earth Day program this year the way they, or this next year the way they did, let's say back in 2007, 2008. But yeah.
Okay. All right. So what do we have next?
Beltane, May 1st Day, May the 1st, May Day. Yeah, which of course has socialist implications. Beltane does not have socialist implications, not in the Marxist sense of the thinking. The Beltane Festival, specifically in Edinburgh, Scotland. There are other Beltanes that are happening around the world, but the one in Edinburgh is the world's largest Beltane. And if there's any event, in my mind, even more so than Burning Man, that exemplifies re-enchantment, it's the Beltane Festival in Scotland.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
because you have 15,000 people coming specifically to observe the honoring of the changes of the seasons and the deities of nature as they reconstruct what they think to be how a pagan would have maybe done a Beltane celebration. And so here you have this open, acknowledged, accepted expression of mythology, dramatized, energized into this massive spectacle, fire spectacle, drawing 15,000 observers to this huge representative ritual. I've been wanting to go for a long time because I think it would be super important to document with having somebody on location, asking some questions, maybe doing some surveys. I think that'd be fascinating to see how this would play out. I know a lot of people come just because it's a cool show, and it's, from what I've seen, it's a pretty wild show, all right. But the Beltane Festival in Edinburgh definitely is one of those events that is, in my mind, a very important symbol of re-enchantment. That we have firmly landed in the age of restructuring mythology to not just celebrate, but then it kind of becomes the purpose and the meaning and the guiding principle and everything as you get lost in that moment in time in ritual.
Wow. Okay. Put that on our list of things to try and get to some point.
Yep.
Maybe this year, maybe in the future, we don't know.
That's right. May 1 to 2, May Day has another event. This is really, really small, but included in the calendars just simply because it demonstrates the range of locations and the scope of the cultural spread of paganism, and that is the Witches' Gathering Conference in Hamilton, Ontario. From what I understand, it's not a huge event. It's 2 days long, and you've got witches, pagans, and just the curious coming together to participate in workshops and talks on pagan topics, tarot readings, rituals, a Beltane celebration. Apparently, this year there is a sacred self-marriage ceremony.
Self-marriage?
Yes. I'm not sure how that plays out.
Does that mean like I marry myself?
Yes.
What exactly is? I have not heard of this before.
Yeah, I don't know either, George. This is not. Okay, this is not part of the ecosexual movement where you marry nature or natural objects. This is something else. This is self-marriage. Maybe it fits into the concept of ecosexuality. I don't know. It's weird. Sacred self-marriage ceremony.
Sacred self-marriage? Okay. We'll have to do some research and see if we can figure out what that is.
You marry yourself. I've heard of this at other events, this idea of self-marriage, but this is what cropped up when I was doing my homework on different pagan events for this coming year at the Witches' Gathering in Hamilton.
Yeah, they had this cartoon that my kids watched, the Timon and Pumbaa cartoon. My kids watched it a little bit when they were kids. And they had this one episode where Pumbaa had decided he was going to marry himself. It was really funny.
Okay.
Because he says things like, well, how do I know if will I like me? You know, and you know, it's just completely absurd. And but anyway, yeah, it's just so oxymoronic in that, you know, just the very idea of self-marriage. But anyway, okay, so let's move on to the Bear Conference.
Yep. May 7th to the 8th in London. This is the Bank of England Agenda for Research Conference. It's an annual event, and it brings together economists, members from international institutions, World Bank, that type of thing, policymakers, and they're basically working through macroeconomic forces. Global trade imbalances, what that looks like, some of the dominant role of currencies, the role of central banks. And I do know that one of the talking points this year is supposed to be on non-bank instruments such as crypto and stablecoins. And
Okay.
yeah, this is one, and I've included in the calendar, George, because these events, economic events, happen all the time, and this happens just to be one of them that has, in my mind, it bears some importance, being the Bank of England, and that it is an event looking to understand trend lines and trajectories, specifically within the central banking community.
I know the bank in the central banking community specifically.
Yeah, yes, because this is geared towards the Bank of England. I've no doubt, and this is just I'm going to speculate, but I'm pretty positive on it. No doubt that there probably will be, at the very least, maybe policy analysts from the Bank for International Settlements or members of the BIS, because of course the BIS is the world's largest banking system or central banking club. And the Bank of England sits on the Bank for International Settlements. So
it'd be very interesting if they have anything to talk about in relation to gold, because one of the things that, which we don't have time to get really totally into it, but that when Europe decided to confiscate seize Russia's assets in the aftermath of the Ukraine war, central bankers around the world, even though they're not invading another country, but they realized holding foreign exchange reserves carries political risk, and that if somebody, if they believe that because what Russia is doing is wrong, and so if what Russia is doing is, if they don't like what Russia is doing, and so they confiscate their assets, they might do the same thing to us if at some level. And the only reason why I think they would think that is because so much of this had gone to, like, for example, some of the things like calling born-again Christians extremists, and terrorists and things like that. When they saw that rhetoric ramp up, and that rhetoric is reflected in the ideas and the mindsets of the people that are making major financial decisions, they saw, like the Canadian truckers that had their bank accounts frozen just for participating in that event, things like that. It makes people think. It makes the countries that are the central banks that began buying gold reserves and divesting away from the U.S. dollar and U.S. foreign exchange reserves. It's because they're like, this carries political risk. Number of people have written. It's something I'm aware of because of my study in the monitoring the financial section, the financial world. But I think most people are not aware of the extent to which these things are happening.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and just for your audience sake, I already said it once, but I'll say it again. This just is one example of hundreds of similar events that do take place within the banking sector. It's happening all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And hello again. We've got one last segment to discuss that'll be up and coming. Stay tuned.